just realizing like, oh, we're doing this thing together, and we're in this together, and like we're excited to figure it out together.
That was really refreshing to be in a situation where I didn't feel like I had to pretend like I had all the answers.
There was a sense of like childlike play. Did we all just become best friends?
Hi, friends. Welcome to another Dreams of Education podcast with me, Kelly Tenkely, and my friend and co-host,
Michelle Baldwin.
Today, we are talking about field trips and service learning, and we've kind of touched on these just a little bit, but we did so much of it that it seems like we need to do a full episode. So here we are. But at Anastasis, we are really big believers in the pedagogy of place, and using our community as actually a primary resource for learning. And field trips are so brilliant at giving both of those things. And it's learning made visible. It's in context. There are experts who are not us on these field trips. And our classes average about 30 to 50 field trips every school year, which is about one a week, give or take. And we just really believe that learning is at its best when it's experiential, when it's immersive. And the neuroscientist, Dave Engelman, actually agrees with that. He says each time we have an experience, we actually alter the circuitry of our brains. And we certainly saw that firsthand with the field trips and the service learning. But let's tackle field trips first, because you had both roles of being the teacher going on the trips, but also you, the last few years, actually were the one planning trips for teachers and coordinating all that. So where do you want to start?
Oh gosh, we had the most amazing opportunities, because again, when you look outside your school and you start to think, I know for a lot of schools, it's not within the budget to travel as much as we did. And so I know you're going to talk a little bit about how we made that happen. But also, I think that there are opportunities that a lot of schools and educators are unaware of that are actually free for students in schools. We were very fortunate in that our class sizes were rarely above 12. But being able to take kids to the library, for example, for free database training, or learning about primary and secondary sources, all of those kind of things that you don't maybe know are in your community that you have access to all the time. And that some of those trips were just great because some of the times they aligned really well with the inquiry blocks that we were going on. And that for me, as someone who was coordinating, or Camille or Kim, who used to help us with those, that was a lot of the fun in working with teachers to say, okay, where are you in this block right now? How can we support you? Where can we send you? Sometimes the teachers had an idea of where they wanted to go. And sometimes it was the coordinator saying, oh, I know this great place. It goes great with that block. Exactly the lens that you're working with right now. So let's get that set up. And the kids had an experience that was different from just reading about it or watching a video. When you immerse yourselves in an environment outside of the school and getting to hear from someone who isn't your teacher. I think sometimes teachers have that same thing that parents have, right? Is you can tell your kids something over and over again, but until they hear it from somebody different or they experience it hands-on, it doesn't really sink in. And those field trips, sometimes we call them learning excursions, were really a vital part of our everyday learning, and how we helped kind of create something for our kids that was more meaningful than a simple video or just learning.
It also connected our kids in such cool ways with how to be with other adults, how to speak with others who were not, they got very comfortable with that. And we heard from a lot of the people who we visited, your kids ask such great questions. Right. You know, we've never had a group that's so polite, or some of these different things. I think a lot of that came just, they were so used to being around other people, and we would prime them before we went. You know, we're not just Team Anastasis at school, but we represent our school and our values and what we're going to do in the community. We represent our, who we are everywhere, not just at school. And so what does that look like? And I think a lot of that just pre-planning, priming of those field trips was equally important. But it was so neat to see the kind of soft skills built through those field trips, just by very nature of being with people who were in a different place, who they hadn't met before, who were strangers before we met them. Which I think is a unique piece of field trips that we can forget that important piece as well.
It's just practice in how to interact with other people. It's meeting a lot of people that you wouldn't ordinarily meet, maybe in your own neighborhood, or we talk a lot about kids' bubbles and how in their neighborhood they have those are people that they interact with maybe, and that's what they're used to. And outside of school, some families do a lot of traveling, others might not. So what that looks like for each kid, then how they're exposed to someone who looks or thinks differently than they are doing. It's another experience that helps kind of create their perspective of the world. And the more that we can get them outside of those bubbles, the better it is to give them a broader perspective.
Yeah, it really brings the classroom everywhere, right? There's no walls that are containing the learning. It's showing kids too that learning happens everywhere, not just in the walls of our school, that there's somebody that you can learn from no matter where you are. Like all these pieces, they're learning incidentally through these field trips. And as you mentioned, field trips like we did are possible, one, because we weren't purchasing box curriculum. The other thing that made us very easily mobile was that we had small class sizes.
Right.
So when you've got a class size of 12, you can load up in a 15-passenger van and suddenly you're very easily mobile, where teachers are doing the driving to those trips. We have a parent chaperone along, but that agility of the smallness was really important to what we did. But just as you said, when you look at a lot of the field trips we did, they either didn't cost anything or they were low cost. We tried to keep each trip $10 a student or less. There were times that we'd go over because, some of those performing arts pieces are a little bit more expensive, but so neat to have the opportunity to be so mobile that you could say, oh my gosh, we're doing this. I know the library has a primary source that we could access and plan that kind of on a dime and just go. Was so neat.
Well, and I think too, like maybe as the adult who is just really excited about learning about different places and getting excited to go to different places as well. I know I talked about it in the last episode, but getting to go to the Morrison Museum of Natural History and work with world-renowned paleontologists. When in my lifetime have I ever had that opportunity? But did I always know? As a student, when I was in school, did I know that we were around people that were experts? And I know that being in Denver, we do have a lot of opportunities that maybe places, especially like in a rural school, for example, you might not have.
More remote, yeah.
But there are still people in your community that have experiences that you don't have in the school that are more than willing to help out if you just ask. So sometimes it was a grandparent would come into our school and share something that they had been, before they retired, what their field might be. And they brought in an expertise. So it wasn't always us leaving the school for a learning opportunity. Sometimes it was bringing people in. And again, they were more than happy to do that for free. Sometimes we did have an honorarium for some speakers. But again, those opportunities, if you don't know to ask, then you're not going to have them. It was as simple as making sure that we talked with our families as a community and said, hey, these are things that we're doing right now. And sometimes it might be a field that a parent works in, or like I said, a grandparent or a neighbor. And we know a guy who was a Vietnam vet and he wants to come in and talk to your class. Yeah. And all of those opportunities just made the learning richer for our kids, because again, it wasn't just learning by reading or watching a video. It felt like it was a more lived experience when they were speaking with someone like an actual human being that was face to face, right? Yeah.
One of the field trips I had the pleasure of going on was to Lockheed Martin, and we got to suit up in the clean room and actually go into the clean room with all the kids and see the Mars rover up close and actually like touch it and work on it a little bit. It was so like one of those mind-blowing experiences that you're like, who gets to do this? You know, it just, and we wouldn't have known if we were intentional every year about asking parents, you know, what do you do for a living? And then we also ask the question, what are you passionate about? Because sometimes those things aren't the same. But just simply by asking that question, we suddenly saw all these connections we had in the community that we might not have known about without, you know, being intentional about asking, just as you're saying. And like you said, there's so many people in our communities that are willing to have kids in and share their passions and their excitements and their expertise. I'm remembering one of the years that an intermediate class, they were learning about different senses. They were doing something around senses. And the teacher was like, it would be really incredible if we could take away one of the senses, lead them through an experience, and then have them come back without knowing what the experience was and write about it, and then go do it again and guess where they were. And it was a local bread maker that let us do that. And it was it was an incredible experience that I don't know how else we would have done that, really.
When we were in the block where we are in Place and Time, or even a couple of the other blocks where it would fit what kids were learning, we toured grocery stores. Trader Joe's was amazing.
The kids love Trader Joe's.
They did such a good job of taking kids through the whole process and saying, you know, here's where the groceries come in, and here's how we organize them in the store, and here's why. And it wasn't just Trader Joe's. We had a lot of others that would also do that for us, free of charge.
Local butcher shop did that for us. Yeah.
Free of charge, and they were more than happy to share the whole process. So it was like when we talk with kids, like, where does your food come from? And they might be able to say, well, you go to the grocery store, or we know it comes from a farm. But to see the process and having them involve the kids, it was just such a, like, that meaning was elevated for the kids, because it wasn't just, I go pull something off a shelf and I know it comes from a farm originally. They got to go in the back and see, this is what it looks like when it comes off the truck and the loading zone. And, you know, of course, a lot of those kids were like, I got to see this really big truck. It was so cool. But listening to them as they come back and sharing the things that they learned, they have a better understanding of the process. And again, that's part of their community. That's something that they should understand, right? It's not just it was a cool trip. It was something that helped them increase their understanding of who works in their community, how things come to them, rather than it just magically appears on a shelf.
Or in my pantry at home.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about too, that same question of where does our food come from led us to farms, but it also led us to places like Farm Box Foods,
right?
Which is the coolest shipping container farm here in Colorado. And so they retrofit these shipping containers as farms that have, is it aquaponics or hydroponics, or do they do both?
I think hydro. There's a mushroom container, and then also like greens like lettuces and things like that. But I never got to go.
You didn't?
No, I set it up. I know. I set it up. I coordinated that particular trip, and I never got to go on one of them. So I'm a little bit jealous.
You and I should go together.
Right?
It is the coolest place. They also do like saplings to reforest. They are doing incredible things. But what was so neat about that is you see these shipping containers, and the kids are looking at all the green and growing, and it's neat to just be inside. But then as they're talking, and they're like, we can grow all this food with 3 gallons of water.
Right.
And we can grow in a week's time this amount of food. And I don't want to misquote because it's been a minute since I've been there, but it was incredible. They also grow feed for livestock so that you don't have to take all of your land for feed. And they can grow it pretty quickly, and it's beautiful and whatever. But while the kids were there learning about gravity, right? We didn't intend that these gravity fed systems. They were learning about aquaponics. They were learning about, or hydroponics. They were learning about the nutrients that get added to the water so that, things grow well in water. And the mushrooms are incredible that they can grow there. And they were talking about people who purchased these farm boxes and different uses of these farm boxes. And one of the things they talked about was food deserts.
Mm-hmm.
And so our kids are like, well, what's a food desert? And it led to this rich discussion. Grow House was very much the same, which is an aquaponic and hydroponic farm in Denver that exists in the middle of a food desert. And so the kids are able to go and see, oh yeah, I'm walking around, we're driving around this neighborhood. I don't see a grocery store anywhere. There's like a Circle K, there's the gas station. And so that conversation of, if you don't have reliable transportation, where are you getting your food? And the kids are like, from the gas station? That's, like they couldn't believe it. And then it's like, oh, but here's this organization that exists in a food desert where they're serving their community in this way, and they're able to go and see all of that process, which, where else we didn't live in a neighborhood where that was super visible. If people were struggling with food insecurity, it wasn't visible to the kids. So to really think through how others in our city are experiencing daily life, I think was a really happy outcome at those field trips as well.
Well, and it just goes back to some of the things and our motives for our learning excursions were, how are these organizations or businesses contributing to the community? What problems are they solving? So we might have been learning specifically about different types of farming, but then all of that other learning came around as well. And like you said, kids were now exposed to something that they didn't even know was a problem. They didn't know, there's not a grocery store on every corner in a lot of places where people live. So how does that affect where they get their groceries, or if they get their groceries, right? And it really made, like, and Farm Box Foods and Grow House, they both did such a great job of explaining that in a way that our kids could understand, depending on which level of kids or class was there, right?
We often sent every single level because one of us would have that experience, and we're like, all the kids got to have this experience.
How valuable is that? And again, I think it goes back down to, that was my job as a coordinator, of really getting to know the community better, looking for places that maybe we hadn't visited a lot or weren't a typical field trip. I think back, like, a lot of schools, there's that fourth grade field trip that they always go down to the state capitol, right? And in fifth grade, you go see a performance at Denver Center for Performing Arts. Like, you get a specific field trip that was always tied to a grade. And that for me was like, well, that's not really just in time learning. This is important when you're a fourth grader, but not when you're a fifth grader. And how, when we were looking at our community and thinking, okay, where are areas that our kids might not have ever had a chance to go? And what are they going to learn there? So that was, again, I kind of would geek out on trying to find new and interesting places. But in doing so, we made some really great partnerships in our, for our school, as well as for the kids.
And we learned so much as the adults as well. There was so much that it made the inquiry richer because we were having the experience with the kids. We were hearing or understanding a connection maybe the kids wouldn't have made, but then in the reflection when you came back, all that richness could be tied back to what they were doing in the inquiry block. So we would use field trips as provocations, but we would also use them throughout the block to tie things together or to further understanding, or a question would come up in the classroom and it's like, oh, we got to capitalize on that. It would like spark something in us that we knew to think of. But there were so many places on those field trips that I had never been before that I got to go, on a handful of them, not probably as many as I would have liked, but it also opened my eyes to a lot of opportunities in our community, which was, equally great for us.
Well, I'm thinking back to last spring when I was working with an intermediate class. We were learning about how we organize ourselves and talking about different levels of government. And the kids had a pretty good idea like they'd done some work before in the executive and legislative and judicial branches, but mostly at a national level. And they kind of knew state level, but they really didn't know like what does a county government do? So we were so fortunate that Arapahoe County government, I just called them and said, hey, can we come visit? And they were like, sure. When we got there, they told us that this was the first time a school had ever toured the county government offices. And I was just floored.
Which just seems bananas, because you guys came back and you were like,
oh
that
my
was
gosh,
one of the best trips of the year.
They prepared like the best day for us. They had us simulate a public meeting. And so some of the kids got to act as commissioners and some of the kids got to act as if they were the public with some concerns. They got to announce a proclamation, right? And they plus touring the offices, learning what all of the different offices did. It was a really great trip. And the kids came back with a much better understanding. I was like, oh, so when our parents pay taxes, this is part of where it goes. And I think it's always interesting to hear kids' perceptions of taxes anyway, but this was just another level and like depth of understanding now that it's, when we complain about taxes or we talk about taxes, this is what's getting funded. Like there was one point when they were in the simulation where they were asked if they should put a chocolate fountain in every school. Should we pay money in our taxes to put a chocolate fountain in every school? And the kids were like, well, no, that doesn't seem like it's necessary. And they went through the whole process and they're like, oh, so when we want things to happen in schools, we have to really think about taxpayers of what's necessary for kids, and how can we help those situations in a way that's beneficial for everybody involved, not just, one school. It was a great time. And the kids learned so much. I learned so much. And again, that was the first time a school had ever toured their offices. And I was just like, this should be something that people do.
It also seems so strange. It was the first time we had toured.
Yes. Yeah.
13 years in, you would have thought that we would have done that before then, but
it might have just been, I know that we had several classes that went down to the state capitol and they got to meet with some of our state senators and different aides who worked in the state offices. So I know that was a trip that a lot of classes went on before, but I didn't even realize that the Arapahoe County government offices were so close to our school. It was just, almost going to walk there.
That's another piece is sometimes we would be out just on weekends and things and then come back and be like, oh my gosh, we gotta do this.
Right.
One of my very favorite field trips was the cultural pilgrimage. And we ended up doing that one over and over because it was just such a rich experience for our kids. But we were a faith-based school, and not your typical faith-based school, but we had kids who had never, experienced another culture or another faith practice. And so the oldest kids did this world religion unit where they would learn about these different world religions and the cultures associated. And so we set up this cultural pilgrimage, I don't know, maybe year 3 was the first year we did it. And the kids would go visit a Baha'i temple and a Hindu and Buddhist and
they went to a mosque. They went to a mosque, Greek Orthodox churches, different, depending upon where they were in the city at the time. Sometimes they would go downtown to an all faith church. Sometimes it would just be like a Protestant church that was out somewhere in the suburbs. And then just being able to talk about all of the different types of faiths, and as well as going into their buildings and looking at how their buildings had a different feel. I remember the Greek Orthodoxy, they had gone in and talked about iconography and how important it was into that culture and faith. And the kids were coming back and like, they always came back and said, we have so much more in common than we ever thought. I mean, that was a theme throughout every single year. but also like, oh, I didn't know that about this group of people or this particular congregation or faith group. And when they would come back and just share what they'd learned, it was a better understanding of the minor differences. Like they would come back and say, we aren't as different as we thought we were.
In the shared humanity, because we're so good at othering people, I think.
Right.
And so what would come back more than anything is the realization that, oh, we're actually like, these are my neighbors.
Right.
These are people who care about the same things in Colorado that I care about. They're the same people, it just opened their eyes so much. And a lot of times they would come back and say, I remember this comment that would come back over and over, just the realization of the intentionality behind, a daily, like a call to prayer.
Right.
We got to see a call to prayer and the intentionality of people stopping their day and coming to prayer. They were so nice. The kids would comment, they were just so nice. And they were. And it's like, well, yeah, what did you think they were going to be? Because they're so used to hearing these caricatures of people, whether it be on the news or however they're getting that media wise. And so to actually have them go and sit in a space with, and the people at these places were so generous with their time and their patience with us, and just allowing all the question, all the innocence of the questions, making connections with our kids. I mean, they're some of my favorite people on the planet now, when I think of like who has impacted me deeply, and like Tusha, right? It's like transformative for all of us, certainly the kids, but all of us as well.
And it didn't just stick to that particular pilgrimage trip either, right? Sometimes they would come to our Five Sigma conference and speak on panels and share their wisdom and experience with us and other educators too. So again, it goes back to, it wasn't just a one-off trip. This was a relationship that we worked to build. And we not only asked to come visit them, but then also asked them to come visit us. And I think that's an important piece of it, of the story here, that it's not just a, please provide this for us. It was a give and take, right? So that it felt like it was a lot more, like I keep saying the word partnership. That's probably the best term for it. We aren't asking you to do something for us. We would really want to make sure that this is a relationship that we work hard to build, because that's where like the fear that people have of something that is different. And again, as you brought up, a lot of times kids hear something in media and like TV shows or movies, and they get this idea of what a culture might be like that is so far from the truth. And when you are able to have people coming in and out of your building, and you're going to their buildings and you're visiting and you're knowing who this person is, well, that's not scary anymore. And, I obviously the Star Wars behind me and all of that, the characters, but there's a phrase from Star Wars that fear leads to anger, right? But I also think that fear is based in ignorance and misinformation. And our kids, a lot of our kids had quite a bit of misinformation about people from other cultures and faiths. And then helping them to get moved past that and to learn how, well, that's not a scary person. That's Tushta, right? He's the farthest thing from scary. This is a really cool person. And he's full of kindness and goodness. And when we bring that back now, I hope that that's something that kids were able to take with them, to say, okay, just because I don't know someone and they might look a little unfamiliar to me, that doesn't mean that they're scary.
Or they practice something differently from the way my family practices it, or they have different traditions than my family has. Like, that's okay. They could make room and allow all of it after those experiences. And the kids, the alumni come back, and that's still the one that they'll point to. They'll talk about other trips as well, but that's one that stands out in their minds every single year, because it is a powerful experience to be in somebody's space, to have them be generous with their time, to allow you to ask questions that you might not have the ability to ask just in life. Really cool experience.
But that I could talk to any of our kids who are, college or older that
older.
and even ask them, what do you remember from one of those experiences? And they'd be able to tell you, like they'd sit down with you and talk for an hour, right? Because it was such a rich experience for them and meaningful enough that they carried it with them.
Well, and even like, I'll never forget, you guys went, your class went on a trip to the South Platte, and the kids came back talking about the riparian ecosystem. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. It just, like. Yeah.
The first year we went on that, we actually took a guided tour, and so we were learning about, different river systems in the forest around. That's the riparian thing. But the South Platte and Carson Nature Center have a really good website where they'll say, okay, here are the things that you're going to go on with your guides. And here's, you'll sit through a little class first, and then you'll have permission to go into the river, assuming that the time of year the river was safe enough to be in, and here's what you're going to be looking for. So we could do a little bit of preparation before going. So that first year we spent, I think, 3 days total out at the South Platte, and the kids were sketching and drawing, and we were hiking, and we were in the river, and the guides were showing them different types of insect life around the river, the South Platte River. But we also were able to see other mammals and reptiles and things that just would live in this ecosystem. And then in years after that, sometimes we didn't take the tour. Sometimes we just went on our own, because it doesn't cost you anything to just go to this nature area on your own. Again, very fortunate to be close enough to such a place, right?
Yes. We are very lucky that we have a lot of options right here around us, fairly close. That the kids could go see. Should we talk about service learning?
Sure. I think actually the conversation that we were having about the cultural pilgrimage rolls right into that, because again, it goes back to, we are members of a community, and we're helping kids to find their place as an individual, what that means in a community, but as a member of the collective. And I know Americans get this whole thing about rugged individualism, but we really do belong to each other in a way that the more we see that, the better it is, I think, for everyone. And service learning was a huge piece of that puzzle for us at Anastasis. I always like to bring up the fact that you can do service learning very wrong. It can be pretty tricky, right? It can be very tricky.
It can be tricky.
Yeah. If you come at it from a place of privilege, in that I'm going to go bestow my blessings on you, or that I'm here to serve the less fortunate, that really creates this mindset for kids that, oh, we're better. We've done something better. We've done something right compared to someone else. A lot of kids early on, when we first started doing service learning, would talk about how people would make bad choices, and that's why they were in the situations that they were in.
And that's truly why we started the way that we did, was because the culture that I came out of, the school that I came out of, was also a faith-based school. And there was a lot of, we're praying for others. We're praying for the homeless. We're praying for, it would be kind of this throwaway thing. And we love that African proverb that says, when you pray, move your feet. So it's like, you actually have a responsibility in caring for your community and caring for others and showing up. And even if we did nothing else but the awareness of my experience is not universal,
right?
Other people have experiences and worldviews and understandings of the world that are unique for them. And so it isn't on us to go and fix. It's really, how do we get to know? How do we partner? And it's one of the reasons why we chose to connect with an organization and then stay connected with that class for the entire year.
Right.
Because we didn't want it to be a drop in, do our thing, and then pat ourselves on the back. We were trying to do the opposite of that. And so it was really about, how do we build the relationship? How do we do all of this? And so really it was taking advantage of, again, those partnerships, the relationship, the building awareness, the just paying attention to who is in our community, who the helpers in our community are, and how we can come alongside them.
Right.
So it really was not, it was less about what can we do there was a piece of that, right?
Right.
It was less about what can we do with others and more about, or for others rather, and more about how do we partner well and build relationship well and be in community well, and just understand the state that we live in better, who
Right.
our neighbors are. How do we understand that better?
Being an informed citizen and learning about what that means, can't come at it as, well, we know what you need, so we're going to come here and help you, and we know better, right? That's not it.
Yeah.
It is where are their needs? Where can we help? And there were so many different organizations that really could use the help. They just sometimes needed feet on the ground or someone to help be there to talk with another person. So we had so many different partnerships. For the youngest kids pre-COVID, pre-COVID,
it makes me so sad.
I know
we couldn't go back to that.
But the assisted living facilities in the neighborhoods, often we're like, we have folks here who would love just to have somebody to talk to on a daily basis. We couldn't go every single day, but we went often once a month. And it would be, going in and again, like you said, making sure that it was a partnership, that we got to know people that worked in the places that we visited, as well as the people who lived there. And with the residents, we called them our grand friends, which they loved and we loved. So we'd go and talk with our grand friends. Sometimes we'd play games or crafts. We'd listen to stories that they could tell us about their lives. Again, listening from someone else's lived experience and learning from that. Sometimes we'd learn songs from when they were younger and talk about why those songs were important. Like hearing little kids singing Bicycle Built for Two. I mean, how they're like, why would anybody sing about that?
Sweetest.
Right. But then they got to learn about that time period along with the stories from the people singing with us. It was just a really sweet way of giving back to someone else, but then also realizing that we were getting as much as we were giving. So,
oh my gosh, absolutely.
That's where that whole partnership came in.
It felt selfish sometimes, right? Because we were getting so much out of it as well that you're like, who's helping who here?
Yeah.
Because we really did get a lot out of those experiences. And even with the senior living centers, one of the things that would happen is sometimes our grand friends would pass, and those conversations were just as important for kids. That sometimes our hearts give out, or our some of those conversations were just so important.
My favorite instance ever. So when I first started taking the littles to go to meet grand friends, a lot of times some of those kids don't live in an area where they have elderly neighbors. Some of them live in different states or cities from their actual grandparents, and they're not often around elderly people. And their first experience can be a little scary because if you don't hang out with older people, they look different, they talk different. So there was a little bit
they sometimes smell different.
I mean, and that's something that kids notice, right? So we would have a little bit of front loading of here's the behavior I expect, first of all, because this is who we are, but also if you are a little intimidated, let's talk about why. So we would have those conversations and make sure that they would understand when we go in. The first thing grand friends want to do is they want to touch the younger kids. They always want to hold hands, and that freaks the kids out. So I said, you can tell people what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with. Like, I don't like to hold hands, but I like to do high fives or something like that. So we're giving
self-advocacy
exactly permission to show kids that they have agency to say, I don't like this, but I do like this instead. Also, there was one of our grand friends never spoke to us at all. She was very much, she would sit in her chair and she would just kind of stare. And the kids called her Yaya. But she didn't really react a whole lot. And then we sang a song she knew. And her eyes lit up and she started to sing. And one of our little guys that was in my class goes, did you see that Yaya? She was singing and smiling. And he was so lit up just from that experience.
Yes. I remember that experience because they came back and immediately stopped in the office to tell me all about, say.
And knowing that they could make an impact on something so small, that was an act of service in a way that, when you're 5 or 6 years old, you're not told that you can make a big impact on people, but that was huge for them. And they saw it firsthand, and they were able to experience and the joy that it gave them, but it also gave them an understanding to the smallest things, or things that we think are the smallest things, can actually be huge in the life of another person. And we shouldn't take those for granted. They're just as important.
Going back to the field trip that the kids did, we bet, I think we had Ryan from Network Coffee House come out and talk at a metanoia, is how we originally got connected with him. And he was sharing about the work that he did and the work that the organization does. And he invited us, he said, we do these experiences just so people can build awareness of what it feels like to be somebody who's asking for money. And so our kids actually got to do that experience, which I think is actually unheard of, because they were our junior high kids. They were so young probably for that experience, but they essentially shadowed a panhandler, somebody asking for money, holding a cardboard sign on the, and they got to hear the story and got to know them a little bit. And at the end, the kids came back and said the thing that they noticed the most is nobody will look you in the eye. People ignore you and pretend you're not there. And the folks that they talked to at Network said that was the hardest part, was feeling less than human. They said it's not so much that, nobody's giving us money. It's that we're not really human anymore. They won't give us eye contact. And it changed our entire community, the way that we thought about, interacted with, all of those things. But it was that awareness, the seeing others, hearing their story, and then experiencing enough that you start to build empathy in a different way than you might have otherwise.
Right. Well, and we've talked a little bit about like the partnerships that we've done that worked well, and how we built those relationships. And it might have been an organization, like I said before, the assisted living facilities, or we partnered with So All May Eat, the same cafe. We worked with some food banks, some local mission groups, some immigrant service centers where we would help them put together welcome packages for families that were just coming to Denver, getting a care package full of shampoo and soap and, other toiletries and things that you didn't know that, I might need this. Right. But just those kind of things were the easy things to plan and build partnerships with. Sometimes they didn't always go well. And right. Yeah. And that's important, I think, to talk about also, because, as we said earlier, thinking that what people need is an assumption that can kind of backfire. And I mean, it was a great lesson for all of us, but so go ahead.
I'll just tell the story so that it has context. But, when we would do field trips downtown, the junior high would do field trips downtown. If it was around the lunch hour, they would do like a flash mob of good, which essentially was they would bring down a little grill. They'd bring all the hot dogs and fixins for hot dogs. And the idea was to feed the folks who were near the Capitol or whatever. And so they would go down and we did this probably 3 times. And the third time we were down there, best of intentions, right? We're like, we're down here, let's feed some folks while we're down here. Best of intentions, one of the Capitals, I can't remember his title, but came up to our group and said, this actually isn't really helping. Like you're making the problem worse. And the kids were like offended by that at first, right? Because that wasn't their intention. But we invited him to come talk to the kid. We said, would you come talk to the kids and share why this is not helpful so that we can understand, what might be more helpful. And he did. He came in and he talked to the class and shared, why it exacerbates the problem that they're having, which his job was to clean up drug needles. And he's like, every time y'all are out here, the drug problem in this area goes up, it increases and it creates other problems that you're not seeing. And he gave great suggestions for other ways. Like, if you're wanting to come down here, you're wanting to help, like, love that heart, but here are more productive ways that you could do that would actually be really helpful for us. And so I think as the adults, having the humility to listen in those moments where we think we're helping even. Mm-hmm. And that was unusual. That wasn't necessarily a regular like service partner. It was just something that we're like, as long as we're down here, we should, we could do this good thing. But with our service partners, we were obviously more intentional about getting to know the organization, asking where they needed help instead of just showing up and doing something. But I think that was an important lesson for all of us, for the adults as well as the kids learned so much from that experience as well, of just because we see a problem doesn't mean the way that we fix it is the right way.
Right. Well, and I think we had talked before a little bit about how the mentality around service can take on some really unhealthy tropes in race, steeped in racism and classism. But again, I know a lot of people want to help. And sometimes the way, as you just said, the way that we think we should be helping is actually not helping. But the intentions are good. So how do you direct that energy and what you would hope to do by partnering with groups who are actually helpful? That's hard.
Who have been in that community serving those people long enough that they have the relationship, the understanding, all of those pieces to tell you this is what we actually need here.
Absolutely. That takes, like you'd said before, some humility to go in and say, okay, I don't know what's best. I do want to help. And then looking for the groups that have been doing the work and then helping to plug in if they even need you. Sometimes they say, we don't need your help. And you're like, okay,
which is also good. Yeah.
Because sometimes the best way you can help is not to get involved.
Right. Or they'll tell, a lot of times they might've told us, we don't really have a role for 5-year-olds to play here, but something that would be helpful is spreading the word about our organization, or, letting the families that you serve know that we exist, things like that, which was equally cool. I want to tell this story of how one of our service partners came to be, because it really happened very organically through the inquiry block. So we were in the inquiry block called Who We Are, and the kids were reading, the first book that they read was Out of My Mind. So this is an intermediate class that Lana was teaching. And as they're reading Out of My Mind, the kids start to comment, they're reflecting on the book, they're reflecting on the story, and they're like, I don't really think I've ever met anyone that has different needs like this in my life. Mm-hmm. And Lana was just shocked. She's like, you've never, like, nobody? And they're like, no, I don't even think I've ever seen somebody that is like differently abled in these ways that are being described. Like, I don't even think I've seen somebody. And she's like, not even at like the grocery store. And they're like, no. And so she came to Camille and said, I don't care who the service partner is. I don't have somebody in mind, in other words, but I really would like to partner with an organization that serves this community, because I think it's important that our kids get to know this community and have a relationship with people who are different from them. And so what grew out of this was an amazing partnership that we had over the years with an organization here in town that serves people with different abilities, and both mental and physical. And the kids, the first time, just the same as going into the senior home the first time, they were really afraid, because they just didn't know what to expect. And so, Lana talked with them about they might make different sounds, that you're unaware of, or they might want to touch you, and it's okay. Here's how you can say, keep your agency and say what's okay and not. And they were really, truly afraid to go the first time. And as they developed relationships with the residents of Stepping Stones, it just was such a cool partnership. They'd go and do crafts, or they'd sing karaoke, or they'd do Zumba together,
Right.
all different things. And then they also ran this food bank. And I'll never forget the year that they came back from working in the food bank. It was the same year. It was right around Thanksgiving time. And one of the kids overheard one of the workers there just casually mentioned that they weren't going to have enough boxes this year for everyone. And she said, well, what happens if, what do you mean there's not enough? And she's like, well, we're going to be about 25 short. And she said, well, what happens if you're 25 short? She said, there's just not enough for everybody. Somebody's not going to get, a meal from us because we have limited resources. There's just not enough. And so she came back and could not let this go. And as they were reflecting, she shared this story with the class, and she was like, I just don't think it's right. We should do something. And, all the kids very sweetly are like, yeah, we should do a bake sale. We should raise money. And so Lana let them get into groups and kind of brainstorm ways that they might raise money for purchasing more boxes of food. And in the brainstorming, this student who you had and hated math, cried every day in math. She's listening to people's ideas, and she keeps thinking all the ideas are great, but they all require some amount of capital to get going.
Right.
And so she came down, and she's using these very mathematical terms and words. And she says, Miss Tenkely, here's what's going on. And she presents this idea where she says, we really want to raise money, but I'm realizing that everybody's idea is it's going to require some capital. There's going to be money spent in order to make money. And I just thought it would be better if all the money could go towards stepping stones. And I was like, yeah, that would be better if, it's not typically as easy to think of those ideas.
Right.
And she said, well, I think I have one. And I was like, great, let's hear it. And so she says, well, I have horses. And I'm like, I do know this about you. And she said, well, I was thinking I could bring my horses to school, which was nowhere near her house, by the way. And I could do pony rides, and it wouldn't cost anything because I already have the horses, and we could let people give them treats, and we already have the treats, so we wouldn't have to pay for that. And I'm, in the back of my mind, simultaneously so proud of this kid for coming up with this idea, and she doesn't even know she's talking math right now. And the liability is screaming at me. I'm like, this could go badly. And so I said, well, that's an awesome idea, but a couple of things. One is somebody has to transport your horses here. Oh, my mom won't mind. And I'm like, that could be true.
You spoken with mom yet?
That could be true. We're going to need to talk to mom. Can I call her now? Sure. Call her now. And I said, but before you call her, you also need to think about that I don't own this building. We lease space here. And so I don't know how the church will feel about horses on their property. And she said, well, can I put together a presentation and present to them? And I was like, golden. Let them be the one to break your heart. And so she goes over to them and puts together this whole presentation and pitches it to them. And to my utter surprise, they agree that this is okay to do, which, if you knew these people, shocked me to no end. But now I'm the bad guy again. And so I say, well, there's a thing called liability, and I don't know, if somebody were to fall off or hurt, and she said, oh, well, we could do waivers like at Jump Street. And I'm like, we could do waivers together. So she and Shelly looked up and created a waiver and put this whole thing together. Mom said, yeah, bring the horses. And so we had horses, Anastasis, and she did pony rides for, I think, 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And we had neighbor kids coming over to see what was going on. And girlfriend raised $400 single-handedly in 2 hours with her brilliant horse idea. And they were able to buy 25 boxes of food. And the other kids still did their ideas as well, of bookmarks, selling bookmarks, mm-hmm. and Christmas tags, and, all the things that they were doing. And so we had more money than needed for those boxes. And the kids went to the grocery store and helped shop for the boxes, and then realized that they had extra that they could do pie for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And they were so excited that they could do pie. And then they talked the manager of the King Soopers into giving them discounts on everything because of what they were doing. And so they ended up like, it was just the most beautiful parts
Mm-hmm.
of inquiry and service. And when you empower kids to be in charge and get them excited about serving a community and caring enough,
Right.
you know, she could have heard that comment and just
Oh, well,
done nothing with
right.
it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. Or just like, well, shrug, and I guess that's just what it is. And she, like, you know, had been with that community long
Mm-hmm.
enough that she cared, and that she had these other experiences at Anastasis where it was like, that's not okay. Everybody should get a Thanksgiving meal. You know,
Right.
we got to figure this out. And hats off to Lana for, one, following the conversation of the book and saying we got to connect with the community, for being so brilliant in the way that she empowered kids and allowed them to run with their ideas and supported them to do that. I mean, you couldn't have made that story up. And the ways that it
Mm-hmm.
inevitably ties back into the inquiry is nothing we could ever plan, really. But it's us being aware of the tie-ins and the way that it can come to life.
Well, I think too, if you even look at just purely academically speaking, when kids
Mm-hmm.
care and they've built relationships with other organizations, other people, learning matters to them in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So as you said, that young lady really struggled with her, she had like just a mental block with math. And it was a personal like heaviness for her. He went through that whole process. Pretty soon it was like, oh, well, here's how I'm using math. This isn't so bad. Right. So when I look at it just from a purely academic standpoint, all of the things that she did, the presentation, the getting into, hey, I have this idea and this is what I want to advocate for, and all of the different steps of putting that into place. I mean, everything she had to consider.
By the way, she was 10.
Right. We're not talking about an
11.
18-year-old kid. This is a,
Yeah.
you know, a young kid. How that is what you hope for as a teacher anyway. That's one of the things
and
I hope for.
Budgeting, the whole class
Absolutely.
budgeting for what they could buy and how they could save money. I mean, they were clipping coupons. They were like doing all the things. I think why they went to the manager to begin with is because they didn't consider tax, how much tax would be. And so I think originally they went to the manager because tax put them over the limit. And then as they're pitching this to the manager's like, well, let me help you out. Which was so, you know, again, like you're getting the entire community involved in doing good for the community.
Also, if you want anything from a business or whatever, go in with a kid who's prepared and they will give you everything.
Seriously. We'll tell the story of the capstone girls another day. But when they put on that evening, the silent auction, they anywhere they walked into, they walked out with something.
Right.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
They got a donation from the most unlikely places.
And it just goes back to, again, I think we don't always know that we can ask. And anytime you're doing any kind of a partnership, I think people really enjoy being asked to help out. I think more so than we assume. Kids often don't have that block in them to know that, oh, you shouldn't ask, right? And maybe it's how I was brought up. Don't, like, even if I would go to someone's house and they say, hey, would you like a glass of water? Oh, no, thank you. Because I didn't want to intrude, which is so silly, right?
Isn't that, oh my gosh.
I don't think,
unpack that someday.
I don't think a lot of kids have that anymore. Yeah, right? Because that says a lot about who I am, right? But seriously, kids who go in with an intention of, I've been learning about something. I see the importance. I know that the need is there because we've learned about this and I just want to help. It's very hard to turn down children who want to help.
And when you see a 10-year-old speaking eloquently about the community they're trying to serve, the people they're trying to help, that you hear their passion. And because they've heard from the folks who started those organizations, they speak very well about what the organization does, who it serves, how it, supports the community. So that was always so neat.
Stepping Stone was started by a kid.
I know.
Right? She was in high school when she and her friends had the idea. It's like that was the first part of it, right?
Same high school, albeit 15 years apart. But yes, she started that out of high school.
I know that we hear a lot of, like kid entrepreneurs nowadays, and they've started things that are life-changing. And sometimes people will be kind of cynical and say, well, there's an adult, pushing behind. And I'm like, that's not always true. We've seen kids who really feel like they can change something for better, because they've learned about it, they've experienced it, they've met people, and they have this drive now to say, okay, well, I can help change the world in a very small way, but it's going to impact people in my community. And that's important to me.
It's going to matter for that person.
Yeah.
And I think, going back to our code and the culture that we built, we talked a lot about, at part of our code, when we need help, we ask.
Right.
When we see somebody that needs help, we give it. Right? Like that was baked into what they were doing every day. So I think it felt more natural that was just the lens they were seeing the world with outside of our school as well.
And honestly,
and we had incredibly compassionate, lovely families who were also, doing a lot of that work as well.
I was going to say that I think there's a lot of misconception around, well, I can't do that if I'm not in a faith-based school or in an independent school. There are public schools that do this well.
Oh, absolutely.
Very well. And I think it's
and we know it because they partner with us sometimes.
Right. I think it's important to make that statement, because it's not just about, this isn't just about who we are with being faith-based. This is about a mindset for kids that we belong to each other. It doesn't matter if people are different, if they look different, if they think different, if they believe different. We have to make sure that we look at everyone in our community as we have a belongingness that needs to be front in how we approach the world. And I feel like there's so much talk about division, whether it's politics or anything right now. The way to really combat that division is to remember that the people who we walk past in the grocery store or who we're driving in traffic with, right? Some of us have a lot of experience with, but that they are our neighbors. And whether you call it a calling or just some sense of a belonging, we can make strides in seeing each other as community members responsible for each other. I don't think that's a hard thing to do. I think it's one tiny step is all that matters.
I also think all the time about how schools are central to communities, but don't always act central to communities. Yeah. And so it's like, how do we do that better? How do we connect that even if you don't have a child that is in that school, you care about what's happening there because you see how they're connecting community, which I think is so important and necessary. One of the other times I remember distinctly how service played into inquiry later was we worked with Denver Rescue Mission, and I say worked, really, I think it was building relationship. It was hearing stories, telling our story. We visited them, they'd come and visit us. We'd have lunch together and meals together and do things together. And it was such a powerful experience just from the relationship building, understanding what they do in the community. But one of the outcomes of it was so brilliant in the way that it just unfolded. And again, nothing we could have really planned on, but just another reason why it's so important. These moments of connection are so important because it was an election year. And so the kids were doing a vote with your feet. They were doing a debate where they were trying to get, on each topic, they were trying to get classmates from one side of the room to whatever side they were on based on their arguments and their debate. And one of the pieces that they were debating was around healthcare. And they were talking about universal healthcare. And, you know, kids on one side were saying, well, it works fine for me. My family's good. Like, it seems to be working. I don't see the problem. This is the way it should be. Kind of this out there statement. And a kiddo on the other side that wouldn't necessarily be the one we would expect to do this said, I've just been thinking a lot about our friends at Denver Rescue Mission. Like, what would happen if Dale got sick? Then what? Like, he just doesn't have health insurance? Like, what does Dale do? And to see the kids consider that and move closer to the center where they could agree that, and I remember them saying, like, oh, this is a more complex issue than we thought. Like, there's more to this than just I'm right and you're wrong. And for them to see that, but again, it's because they had connected in empathy, they had built relationship, they knew these people, they were considering my experience is not everyone's experience. And what does that mean? I think was such a powerful moment. I just remember being like, okay, well, these kids are going to change the world. Like, this is going to, these are the ones who are going to do something incredible.
My favorite part of that exercise was that the adults were not telling them, here's what's right and here's what's wrong. Here's where I think. It was all kid led, and they were the ones having the debate. The adults were there to help keep the conversation civil, to ask questions, but not to lead the discussion. And the way that the activity played out, I think if any families had watched it, they would have been really impressed with how the kids did it. I think sometimes there's an assumption that the adults really are leading more than we let on. And that's so not true.
Specifically, we said we're not, the grownups are not saying anything. This is on you guys to lead the conversation and discussion. There was a lot of scaffolding moments that led to that being possible in that junior high classroom. Again, a lot of it has to do with what we do during detox week and just the ways that we interact as adults and the things that the whole culture matters and impacts that moment in time.
It seems like there's I was going to say that it seems like there's a theme with all of our episodes so far, is that everything goes back to relationship and caring for other people, right? That as teachers, we are showing students we are full human beings. We're not just these, people that you see at a school and that's where we live. That it's about, we respect you as a human. We see you as human, that you're not the bad kid or you're not the smart kid or you're not the labels it's different. You're a child in my class. I care for you. I was just thinking, I just sent a card to a student who'd sent me a postcard recently. And I was like, I don't always get the chance to keep up with every student I've ever had. And I've, been in education for over 30 years. That's a lot of kids. But I don't know if they know how much we remember about them, how much we still care about them, think about them all the time, because
all the time, dream about them.
Absolutely. And like hurt for them when they're hurting. We're joyful for them when they're experiencing joy. And I think, again, that goes back down to, there has to be a relational aspect. I'm still their teacher. I still have that line where I'm the adult and they are the child, but whether they're, 5 or 18, however, I still care deeply. And we helped model that for them so that they cared about us, that they cared about each other. They cared about the school as a community. And then again, we branched out through service learning and field trips for them to care more about people in their community as well. So that whole thing keeps going back down to relationships and how vital they are to community, but also just for humanity.
And getting to know somebody, hearing their story, being aware of their experience, like all of that. It's so interesting to me that learning is such a social construct, and yet we keep trying to take the humanity out of learning, whether it be through a one-size-fits-all curriculum, whether it be through AI that is now doing we're getting further away from how relational learning really is, and how much that being rooted in knowing one another, belonging, seeing each other. being aware of others. I think we did something really right by starting with that relationship, and everything we did kind of built out of that. But we were intentional about how we did that,
right?
And what it looked like on a daily basis.
Yeah, I know I said it, I think it was the last episode, that children are not just little receptacles that you pour knowledge into their heads and hope it sticks, right? You have to know the kids well enough to know what gets them feeling passionate about an idea, what helps them click in learning something. And for one student, it looks different than another and another. And we don't always have like linear thinkers. I think there's a lot of linear thinkers. I have a blog post percolating on this, but a lot of linear thinkers in education and even lawmaking, to a degree that they plan things out that just don't work for everybody, right? And when we look at learning, it does not happen linearly. That's really how a lot of school is set up. And when you look back at service learning and the field trips that we did, some people would say, oh, it's very disruptive to what I'm teaching right now. I remember feeling like that and going, nope, this is important. I have to do, this is something that is more important than what I have planned for today. Right.
That can be hard for the planner,
right?
Because you're stopping what you're doing. You're going on this other, you don't know how or if it's going to connect back. So it does sometimes feel like especially, there were weeks every once in a while where you'd have like 4 things in a week,
right? Just
because that's when people were available and that's when it worked. Right. And it was like, well, when are we ever going to get learning done? And it's like, it's all learning. It's all learning. It's all life.
When you start as a teacher to get blinders on to, well, this is what I have planned. These are the topics I have to cover, the skills and concepts I have to cover. It feels like a checklist instead of, here are the overarching themes of what we are hoping kids are going to learn. And when you sit back and kind of let go of all of those other things and allow the kids to experience that. I mean, my responsibility, if I'm teaching a certain age of kid, is that there are some standards and things that are non-negotiable. That's an expectation for them for that particular school year. However, that's not how kids learn. Their brains don't work on timetables like we'd like them to.
And it's remembering that all of life is a learning opportunity. Right. Yeah. Every single second of life is a learning opportunity. So it doesn't have to be contained by us, meaning we don't have to be the only ones holding the learning experience or driving that, having that control. It's not limited to the walls of our classroom. Like, all of learning is life. And I really started to think of our curriculum. I think I've written this multiple times on my blog, but as a living curriculum, because it was alive with the way it moved and the way we would follow it and hold it loosely and allow rather than force. And the experiences were so much richer than any kind of canned curriculum lesson that we could have given on any number of those things.
Right.
And I think it's easy, as teachers, we like that planning piece. At least I do. I like that planning piece, but we can over plan to the point that at the expense of the learning.
We're controlling the learning, and what we think we're doing is more delivery than actual learning. And most children don't learn from learning being delivered. At some point, yes, there are things that you have to help them, but and it's not just, chaos where they're discovering things on their own all the time either. That's when you have a teacher who has learned the art of teaching in an inquiry model. And that's hard. I mean, it was a huge learning curve for me, but,
for all of us.
Yeah. You start to see that the more you control it, the less the kids are actually learning. And it's frustrating for you as a teacher. It's frustrating for the kids. And then that's kind of severed a little bit of the relationship that you've built up to that point. So really, decentering yourself as a teacher. And again, that's what some of those field trips and service learning opportunities provided so beautifully, were opportunities for us to step back, be learners alongside the kids, we were able to ask questions, but then watching the kids really like internalize those trips, and then what they gained from that, what problem is there to solve, or is there a need that can be met? All of those things showed them that they weren't just learning that surface level informational kind of thing. It was also more application and evaluation, right? What problems are there? That's a huge thing to be like, I can identify that, but how am I going to solve it?
Yeah.
Or can I even solve it?
I love that you named the teachers are there. The kids are seeing you as learners alongside them. They're seeing you get curious and ask questions and all of that. And it's so natural on some of these field trips, because we were very much also out of our depth of knowing, you know, exactly what was going on or who we were going to meet or how we were going to ask. But I was also thinking about, you had mentioned Same Cafe, which stands for So All May Eat. And Same is an amazing organization that is a pay what you can cafe. And the kids would go down and help with the pantry and help sometimes with food preparation. They'd eat with whoever was at Same.
Washing dishes.
Got to know, wash dishes. But one of the things, one year we had this great giving garden. Several years we had a great giving garden. But two of our teachers were like, we don't think we know enough. The garden was enormous at this point. We don't think we know enough to keep this going. And so they took a permaculture class outside of school and worked on that garden together and brought the kids in on that garden. And then it became this great giving garden that gave back to, you know, they could deliver fresh produce to Same and to some of the food banks where a lot of times there's not fresh produce to work from because it's perishable, right? So it doesn't tend to stay on shelves as well. But I loved that we were able to provide something to the chefs at Same that they could do. They make pizzas and they could make these incredible pizzas out of the most random things that we would bring them, and they'd be delicious. Hundreds and thousands of tomatillos. But even the kids seeing the teachers get excited about something and then go, I'm going to go learn more about this outside of school. And then I'm going to bring it back so that we can do this better. I think is just such a neat ecosystem of learning that, again, you don't see in a lot of schools that are curriculum heavy, not because there's not interesting people and people who are learners in that building. It just, the focus is in a different direction. You often don't have time to do things like that or the permission to do things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes back to redefining what learning is in the first place, that it doesn't have to be painful or something you suffer through, or that you only do at school, or that you have to, from kindergarten to 12th grade in the United States, then you're done if you want to be done. I mean, it really does gatekeep learning in a really awful way, in my opinion. But also it sets up this really weird hierarchy of who owns the knowledge and ew, for lack of a better term, right? I mean, it really, learning has always been an exciting thing for me. And I know that that's not the case for a lot of people. And it makes me sad because there's always something new to explore and fun to learn about. And for people who've had maybe a really bad experience in school, they equate learning to pain or something that they just don't like.
I mean, look at how many people in the country never read a book after formal schooling. And I'm like, that is such a disservice that we're doing to humanity, that we are so focused on teaching them to read that we kill any desire to read.
Right. I know Pernell Rip talks a lot about like reading logs and requirements and taking away all choice of reading for kids, and only, you can only read this set of books, or, graphic novels are not real books. That's not true. Or even audiobooks. There are some people like, well, that's not reading. And I'm like, before the printed word, that was how.
How did you think it?
Right. So, and I've not ever been a really good, like audio learner. So I really have been
Same.
forcing myself to listen to audiobooks because it makes me focus my attention in a different way. And I love that. Especially love listening to audiobooks that are read by the author, because it's just like this peek into someone's mind. But I think that we have taken traditional schooling and made it something that is actually separate from learning in a very negative way. So again, when you look at people like, like you and I, we liked to be good students. That was part of our identity, right? But for people who don't feel that they were good students, school was not a happy place for them. Or it might have been where they saw their friends.
Or was happy for a different,
right?
Happy for a different place.
That's where I see my friends. That's where I get to play sports, or maybe it's where I get to eat. There are lots of different reasons why school could be a good thing for them. But when we really look at learning, I'm really hoping more than anything that, we help people redefine learning and make it something that's joyous and joyful and, yes, challenging, but people like challenges when they're interested in it, right? And that you make it meaningful.
Authentic,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
The horse rides were an authentic response. That all the learning that happened along with that was an authentic response to something that they saw, because they were immersed in it. They had the relationships, they were immersed in it. All of that, I think we forget how important it is to have the authentic moments.
Right. And it goes back again to what we were saying is relationships. You cannot build learning in a group of, I think the biggest class I ever taught that was not a choir. Like when I was a vocal music director, I had a choir of 50, 60, 80 kids, whatever. But the biggest class that I ever taught was 40 some kids at one time. And especially as a new teacher, I think I was 24. I don't know. That's a lot of kids.
It's a lot of kids.
And unfortunately, I'd have them for 45 minutes, maybe every day if I was lucky. That still was not enough time. And again, as a new teacher, I don't think that I knew I was supposed to get to know them as well as I would have said, I need to know more about you. I know that there were kids that I didn't reach. I was not successful teaching them. I didn't always value them as learners, but I think we have a lot of systems that are set up to put teachers in a place where they can't really thrive as a teacher and the students can't thrive as learners. That's something I wish we could fix.
Yeah. My core wound was belonging. And so that was the number one thing I cared about. If we do nothing else, can we create a space of belonging and where kids feel like they can be themselves?
Right.
Because that is something I did not experience myself very well in school. And so, deeply important for me is that piece of belonging, and how do we belong to communities? How do we belong to a school community? How do we belong to a classroom? How do we belong in the larger community? I think is all so important, and not that we always did it perfectly.
No. I hope that anyone who listens to this podcast realizes that we've learned a lot, and we are very happy to share our successes. We're also very happy to share those that weren't.
I was going to say, there was an incident where we thought we were sending kids to Denver Dumb Friends League to be with puppies. And it turned out to be not puppies. It was kittens. And they locked the kids in the room with the kittens, and they were hissing at them, and they were all terrified. So we didn't go back to that. But it's that learning process. I mean, even that was a learning process for all of us and for the kids, and, how to ask for what you need. That was a young class, and they were learning how to ask for, get me out of here. So it doesn't always go well, or sometimes, you go to the horse rescue and you come back caked in mud. Right.
And just even knowing that those are kind of things that, around the Denver metro area, but also as far as, to Colorado Springs, which is south of Denver, there are areas where people have to either surrender animals because they can't take care of them. They're neglecting or abusing. So there are a lot of organizations in Colorado, Dumb Friends League is one of them, that provides rehabilitation services for animals, but they almost always need hands to help. So that might look like kids are going to help shovel out a horse bay, and they're learning how to go through the manure and the hay and all that. Or something that we loved was that they had a Tales for Tales program where kids could come.
I love Tales
Isn't that
for
awesome?
Tales.
Could come read to horses, and the kids would sit in front of a horse and just read out of a book. So it was a win for the kids reading. They got some time just to sit and read out loud. But the horses, I mean, I got to go on a couple of these and watching the horses and how they really calmed down. And these were, again, horses that might have been neglected or abused and had to have been surrendered. So it was a really interesting way for kids to see sometimes, yes, we want to help people in our community, but sometimes the way to help people is also to help animals. And I never thought that would be something that would be a service trip that was valuable until I started to learn more about it.
Valuable for everyone. And the kids were so sweet in how they would pick out the book. They would, they with such intention and love of like, well, last time I read a book about this, but I think they really liked this part. So this time I got a book about, and it was just the sweetest.
Sometimes when I read to my horse, I use a different voice for different characters. And I think my horse really likes it, just the excitement that they had. And again, just practice and reading.
And kids who were hesitant readers would go all in and be willing to do that, which is exactly why they have programs like that. And that was a neat one too. We have had, it makes me smile every time we do this, because we're just going back and remembering and seeing how it all connects, and even coming at it with fresh eyes and remembering how it all connects is so cool.
Well, and I know we've said this quite a bit, but I know that we are the unicorn school, as Christina said, but this doesn't mean that if your school isn't a micro school, or you don't have the budget for transportation to go on all of these learning trips, there are ways that you can bring community to you. There are a lot of things that don't have cost associated that can create more meaningful, deeper, richer, whatever adjective you want to use, experiences for your kids. And you don't have to always be the expert. So if you are in a school where your options are limited, it doesn't hurt to ask, right? Go into your administration and ask to bring in speakers, ask to have experiences outside the school if possible. Just, again, it doesn't have to always look a certain way. And just because we did it this way, maybe it looks different for you, but it might be an option that you've not tried for before. And I think that might be an important step to changing how we view learning for kids.
Yeah, totally agree. My hope is that every school becomes the unicorn school in their own way, serving their own community. Like I said, seeing kids in their own schools, getting to know them well enough that the curriculum starts to feel like pants that don't fit, and then you start solving these other problems, which is how we got our start. So my hope is that people listen and are like, oh, this is possible.
Right.
We just have to think about it differently. We have to, do our own inquiry about what could be, and kind of let go of some of the assumptions that this is just the way it is because this is the way it is. Right. I was thinking last night that education is one of the, maybe the only, but certainly one of the only, where we are apprenticed every single day for at least 12 years, maybe 13 years. From August until May daily, we are apprenticed in education because we're seeing how a teacher is teaching us. And then we go and, get our degree and go into the classroom. And we've been apprenticed in outdated methods for so long. And so how do it's going to take intention for us to kind of shift the way that it looks. And part of that is just changing the mindset that this is how it has to look because this is how it's looked.
Right. And again, asking permission, and sometimes forgiveness for trying something different. Right. I think that it does.
Well, and we need more administrators that are permissive and saying,
yes,
try it. Let's try it. You don't know. Let's try.
Right. And it's also helping families to understand. I know that there's also often a lot of pressure, and we felt it at our school too. Oh gosh, they're 5, they don't know how to read yet, and we're all like, it's fine. And like, no, they
okay.
Our neighbors they've been reading since they were 4. I'm like, your child's going to be fine, I promise. And then watching them ask those the nervous questions that parents will ask, because they're afraid, first of all, by comparison, that, well, if my neighbor's kid is doing this, like, stop comparing. You have a completely different child, right? And honestly, our school looked different every year because we had different kids.
Every single year.
Even if they were the same kids.
And sometimes different adults.
Right.
They're coming fresh every year.
And
even if it's the same kids.
Even if they were with you the year before or 5 years before, they still come to you with different experiences and they've grown up a little bit. So how do you approach that? Again, honor the individual as well as the community that they're coming from. But parents still have that fear and the hesitation, and especially fear of comparison. And I think because we keep backing it up. And I mean, that's just the worst thing to do to a kid is, okay, well, by 3rd grade, you should be reading. Oh, now we want it by 2nd grade. No, now we want it by 1st. Now we want it in kindergarten. And we've lost all sense of play, which that structured play and non-structured play
builds.
That's how you're building all
the structure
exactly.
in your brain to be able to read.
And as soon as we remove all of those things from a child's life and we put them into a more traditional structured learning setting, we have completely removed their ability to do what their brain naturally wants to do. So, and again, we've got so much research on that. Why are we ignoring it? So helping parents to understand that's hard, because I don't expect them to be experts in education. And I know that
because they have also been apprenticed for
exactly
16 years.
This is how I did it.
Education.
Right. Yep. So helping folks to really understand that if you take the risk and you make the leap, that yes, your child will be fine. If you're worried about them being on the honor roll in whatever school they're in, is that really what you want for your child? Is that the goal? If not, back up and see, well, what do you really want out of life for your kid? And then when you have that answer, let's go from there. And maybe that doesn't look like forcing a child to read before he or she is developmentally ready to read.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting that the thing that hinders learning the most is the constructs we've put in place that decide what learning looks like and how it's going to happen?
For sure.
You're like, gosh, we've created our own problems here.
My youngest...
And then we keep doubling down on them instead of asking better questions.
My kids had 2 parents who were educators, right? When they were growing up. I mean, can you imagine? And I was that parent who was, oh no, my oldest one wasn't reading before I thought she should be reading. And my youngest one would not let me quiz her on anything. And I would just say, what color is this? And she would turn her head away from me and say, it's red. I'm like, no, it's not red. What color is this? And she would keep saying red. And I kept pushing. I'm like, at some point you would have thought, Michelle, get your stuff together here. She's not playing this game right now. She knows what that color is. Leave her alone. And if she doesn't know what the color is, she will. She'll get it. I think we're also so worried that maybe there's something wrong with our kids that we want to make sure that we jump on top of it instead of allowing them to grow to be who they are. It wasn't my job as a parent to force my kids to be little clones of me or of their father or whoever. They have the right to be who they are. And I know that's hard for a lot of parents.
It's hard to separate the anxiety of your part walking around outside of your body all the time.
Right. I want to be...
You want to protect, you want to do the right thing. And so I understand all that. And I think it's misguided where we put our attention.
Yeah.
Because we're not asking the right questions. So we put our attention on things that are actually in some ways even detrimental and make them hate whatever it is.
Right. It
has the opposite effect.
That comparison.
What we intend.
The comparison of, am I a good parent? Am I a good parent? Am I a good mother? I mean, that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself. And we see that even as we'd have chaperones come on our trips, how parents would interact with the teacher versus the kids, and then also how they would kind of like trying to corral their kid into a certain behavior. And I learned when we have chaperones, I need to talk with the chaperone ahead of time to say, this is the expectation of what you are to do on this trip. And if you see your child doing something that you didn't expect or that makes you anxious, I have it. Don't worry about it. You don't need to parent on the trip.
Point.
And that was hard. I know even for me,
I always wanted to place my hand on them and say, oh, dear one, take a breath. It's going to be okay.
It'll be fine. That's hard.
It'll be okay.
There's so much pressure.
We know your kid. You don't have to put on the show right now. Like we know them and we love them exactly how they are and what they're doing right now. And we in no way are judging what kind of parent you are in this moment. You know, like it was just, it's okay.
Dear parents, the pressure is so high.
It's so high. I'm glad that you brought up that interaction. And how to work with parents because they were chaperones for us. And it's interesting. I don't know if our parents picked up on this, but our youngest teachers were always like, oh, a field trip. And the anxiety was not the field trip. It was the parents going to be judging me as a teacher on this field trip. And the parent was thinking the same thing. This teacher's going to judge my parenting based on what's going on. And so, I don't know how you overcome that, because a lot of it is kind of underlying. There's other things that created that moment. But if we could show up as humans, take a deep breath and say, I'm not going to judge you based on however your child acts today. Don't judge me based on however your child acts today.
Right.
We're in agreement. Let's go have a good trip. But well, I think we brought up reading. I think next week we should talk about how reading looks, how writing looks, how math looks when it's not dictated by a curriculum.
I think that there's a really interesting column in one of the national newspapers that talks about accommodations also. And I would love to, especially within the topical area of helping kids read, and how do we make accommodations? What accommodations at Anastasis look like versus what they might look like in a school. We often say that every kid at Anastasis
Michelle, everything was an accommodation all day long.
I mean, yes, right?
Kind of.
I'm wearing accommodations right now in the form of my glasses. However, I think it's an important thing to note that, again, when we start to think about equity in education and how we approach the learning process for each kid, we had essentially an individualized learning plan for every child. And
every single one,
when you look at that in a public school, and what I used to work through with IEPs or 504 plans, any of those kind of things, and how those are viewed by people in society at large. That's, I think, if you don't have a really good understanding, but then if you also have educators who are trying to co-opt the narrative of how accommodations are unfair because not everybody gets them, addressing that as we talk about how we teach reading and how we teach math or whatever, or writing, whatever it might be. I think that might be an important thing to add.
Cool. You'll have to send me that.
I absolutely will.
We tend to share a lot all the time. But I didn't see that one. So, well, onward.
Onward.
Hey, Michelle, where else can people find you online?
I blog at avenue4learning.com, and the 4 is the actual number 4, not the word 4, avenue4learning.com.
And you can find me at dreamsofeducation.wordpress.com, which is my original blog. You can also find me at ktsplace.com, which is where I share a bunch of resources and kind of projects that we're currently working on. And we are both on Blue Sky at the moment, but not as active as we once were on our favorite bird. Come find us and connect with us in other places, and we look forward to connecting with you.
Education.